am Holly Madison, and I listen to Brian Shapiro.
Hi, this is William Shatner, and I listen to Brian Shapiro.
What's up, everybody? Happy Thursday. Welcome. It is the Vegas Take. Sharp and Shapiro back at you. Glad you could join us, and we're going to have a fun show for you lined up this evening. Coming up at the bottom of the hour, he's going to be joining us for 90 minutes. I'm really excited to have him in studio. Democratic candidate for president, Seth Moulton, will be joining us, and boy, he is a fantastic guest. Got some degrees from Harvard, too, JD, so this is a smart guy, and he has been critical of these debates, these Democratic debates the last couple days. So I want to get his take on things. What do Democrats need to do to defeat Donald Trump? Who would he support if he had to? So we'll get to Seth Moulton coming up here at the bottom of the hour, and he'll be joining us in studio, too. He's in Vegas, so glad to have him here. We're also going to get to this Cincinnati Trump rally tonight. This is the first rally he's had since the North Carolina rally, where it was send her back, send her back. So we will report on if there are any racist chants, we will certainly report on those. But, you know, the guy we have with us on the line right now, I mean, you want to talk about the utmost respect for the man. His name is Fred Guttenberg, and he's an American activist against gun violence. His 14-year-old daughter was killed at Stoneman Douglas in that shooting on February 14th, 2018. And this man is doing so many good things, in my opinion. And, you know, we just had this shooting, the Gilroy shooting. So I really wanted to get his take on that, but wanting to have him on for a long time. Fred Guttenberg now joining us on the line. Fred, I appreciate you coming on, sir. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Doing good. Really appreciate you taking the time. You know, I hate having to introduce you like that, Fred. And I know every interview that you do, they're talking about your daughter and they're introducing you in that way. And I just, my heart goes out to you and your family. And I know everybody says that, but it's true. I feel that way. But every time, it seems like every week, Fred, we have one of these shootings happen. Mm-hmm. And we had one in Gilroy. What goes through your mind every time you turn on the TV and you see we just had another mass shooting? Well,
you know, you had one in Gilroy, and you had one, I think, a day before that in New York. Every time one of these goes on, it does two things. It brings back a lot of just emotion for me. You relive the day, but it also frustrates the hell out of me that this is actually something we have to fight about, that we have to work to do something about this, that we have to convince people we have a problem, because we do. And the reality is, every day that we don't do something about it just means that those who fight me on this, or those who don't, there's a better chance they're going to be the next victim. Because the reality is, we have 40,000 people a year who die of gun violence in this country right now. Mm-hmm. The Gilroy shooting is a perfect example of what's going to happen. There were 3 people who were there, part of that shooting scene, that were also at the Las Vegas shooting.
Right.
Okay? And that's going to be normal now. We'll be part of more than one mass shooting if we don't do something.
No, I could not agree with you more. And a 6-year-old and a 12-year-old lost their lives, as well as a young man in his early 20s. This 19-year-old kid, I'm just talking about the Gilroy shooting now. Yep. He's in Nevada, right? He buys a weapon very similar to an AK-47. He goes into California illegally with it. And why is it? We hear it all the time, Fred. Thoughts and prayers, mainly from people on the right, okay? And yet nothing is done. So my question to you, why is it that it just seems like nothing is getting done in D.C.?
So the phrase thoughts and prayers, when you hear it, it means somebody's going to a cemetery. And so that phrase just, I don't ever want to hear it again. I will tell you, have hope. There is more happening in this country right now to do something about gun violence than at any other point. If you look back over the past year and a half since my daughter was killed, legislation is happening in states, it's happening in cities, businesses are stepping up and doing more, state attorney generals are stepping up and doing more. And in D.C., something is happening. the House is passing really great legislation. It is hitting the Senate, and the Senate has become a cemetery for good legislation. It is a graveyard. The Senate, to me, is the biggest issue in the next election. We've got to get rid of McConnell, and we got to flip the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
Whoever the next president is, okay, whether it be the current guy or someone else, will sign it. But we've got to get it through the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
The House is doing its job. You see good things happening, whether it be background checks or even right now, they're going to be taking up Jamie's Law, which will extend background checks to ammunition.
Yeah.
Or they're looking at CDC funding, and they're looking at PLACA, which shields the gun industry from liability.
Right.
There's so many good things happening right now in the House, but we need a Senate to cooperate, and that's why elections matter.
And for people that are way on the right that are going to say, well, this guy, Fred Guttenberg, it's horrible what happened to his daughter, but, he wants to take all of our guns away. That's false. And correct me if I'm wrong, while you would prefer that, all assault-style weapons were banned, you believe that, given the current political climate, that ban would most likely not happen, right? So you're not really taking those measures to try to make that happen.
Listen, that entire argument is just a way to stop a conversation. That's all that it is. My father-in-law owns weapons. My best friend is a Coral Springs police officer who carries an AR-15 with him for work purposes, who actually has developed a mechanism to safely lock these weapons so that when people do actually have them, at least they're getting locked up. And I've shared information on his lock because I want people locking them up. I am not the guy walking around saying ban, ban, ban. And I'm very realistic in today's political climate. When you say ban, people run left and right. I am a guy who's standing here trying to be as pragmatic as possible to talk about ways to keep weapons out of the hands of those who predictably want to kill or hurt themselves. Now, there are citizen initiatives to look into the idea of banning, giving citizens the opportunity to vote. I don't have an issue with citizens initiatives like that, but I'm not pushing for a legislative ban because the reality is there's so many other things we can do.
Sure.
That will save lives.
Yeah, I
want to lower that 40,000 a year number.
Yeah, I completely agree. If you're just joining us, Fred Guttenberg, American activist against gun violence, lost his 14-year-old daughter, Jamie, Stoneman Douglas High School shooting. Okay, so explain this to me, Fred. How is it that the shooter, the police were called to his house, like 80 times or something? It was some astronomical number. You know more about this than I do. How the hell does that kid get his hands on a weapon to begin with?
Well, listen, that's part of the problem and why I fight the way that I do right now. Listen, I live in a state where there were no real restrictions. Since what happened to my daughter, we've passed reforms in this state that will make it impossible for a kid like him to get the weapons. But if somebody is deemed a risk to themselves or someone else, as would have happened with the kid who killed my daughter, the police have the ability to go through the process to remove those weapons, red flag laws, or in some states they call them extreme risk protection orders.
Right.
It should never have happened. This is common sense. This shouldn't be a fight. This should be something that gun owners, people who do want to get out there and keep their guns, agree on, because this is about safety. It's not about removing somebody's weapons. It's about saving lives.
Yeah, I agree. What would you say to somebody like Dana Loesch, who has never said one negative thing about the NRA? She has paid a large amount of money to say nice things about the NRA and be their spokesperson. What would you say to people like that and people at the NRA that say, well, we support what you're doing, but yet when it comes to gun legislation and common sense gun laws, all they care about is their bottom line. Am I wrong in saying that? All they care about is making money. Do they not?
Well, listen, and I've said it to them often. My daughter was a cost of doing business for the NRA. That's what victims of gun violence are. That is all that they do care about, is keeping in place a process that is focused on selling more weapons. Safety has nothing to do with it. Listen, the reality is these gun groups, if they meant what they said, they would be the biggest proponents of gun safety legislation. If they believed, for example, for 1 second, an AR-15 was a sport weapon, that's what they say.
Yeah.
They would be the biggest proponents of gun safety legislation to ensure that it's only ending up in the hands of people who truly want to do sport and not the hands of killers.
Well, if you're using an AR-15, to hunt, aren't you kind of cheating? If you're using an AK-47 to hunt animals, isn't that kind of unfair?
Yeah, and it'll probably just make it so that the animal's not really salvageable after.
Right, you can't eat it after.
That's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, that is definitely another conversation, but I certainly agree. It's absurd. Fred, I want to talk a little bit about what happened to Scott Peterson. I mean, if you had a chance to sit down and speak with Scott Peterson, we know what happened. We know what took place there. He's been called everything from a coward. First of all, what would you make of that whole situation, and what would you say to him?
Scott Peterson,
yeah, had
he done just a small semblance of the job that he was supposed to do, my daughter would be alive today. So, to make a long story short, my daughter was the second to last to be shot. She needed one more second, and she'd be alive today. Scott Peterson could have given her more than just that one more second. So I blame Scott Peterson as much as just about anybody in this fiasco. He's a failure. He is a coward. He is a liar. And I hope every horrible thing that he has coming to him through the legal process succeeds. He failed these kids and these adults on that day.
Do you believe the laws for gambling and drinking and purchasing a weapon in the United States should be uniform in relation to age?
I think that's a great question. I don't even know what the age is for gambling, to be honest.
It's 21.
I'm going to assume it's 21. Okay. That is the age I think it should be for purchasing weapons, too. So I guess that's the answer to that would be yes. Listen, I have a almost 19-year-old son at home. He's still 18. He'll turn 19 in November. And I'm around these teenage boys all the time, and they're great kids. They are still maturing. They are still emotional. They still handle things differently than they would if they were grown-ups. And so the idea that at the age of 21, they should be able to, in an unsupervised way, have weapons makes no sense to me. Others will give me the whole military argument. You're going to be 18 in the military. Yeah, but that's a controlled environment. Mm-hmm. So I absolutely believe the age should be 21. It is in Florida now.
Yeah, I agree. I couldn't agree with you more. I think it should be at least 21. I wanted to ask you, this was a really weird moment, and I know you've been asked this before, but listen, I'm not a very big Brett Kavanaugh fan. Okay, and many people are not. But this was a moment to me that speaks volumes about his character. You're very kind. You were very kind, and you went up to him, right? And I want you to kind of explain what happened, but you kind of just put his hand out to him to shake his hand. Look, let's be honest, Fred. You have been on every network, okay? You're a very recognizable guy. There's no question he knew who you were. And if he's going to say he didn't and he just thought you were just somebody in the crowd asking him for a picture or something, that, it's absurd. You go up to him. You were very nice to him, right? You try to shake his hand, and the man just walks away from you. I mean, explain to me that whole situation.
Yeah. So it's actually worse than that. Number one, let's talk about the crowd. This starts with the big lie. You had the senators in the semicircle, and then you had all the cameramen sitting in front of the senators, and then you had Kavanaugh sitting at his table. Behind Kavanaugh was, I guess, about 15, 20 rows of seated, invited guests. Behind the seated, invited guests were all the tables of seated media. Behind the seated media was where the hecklers were, the crowd he was referring to.
Right.
There really wasn't a crowd. What it was is a line of hecklers that were being walked through with a security on both sides of the heckler. So as they're being walked through, they're screaming, but they're being walked in the door, walked through, and walked out. There is no crowd. There's just a disturbance. That's it. As far as I am concerned, I was invited there by Senator Dianne Feinstein, and she introduced me. And the reason why he knew who I was is when I go to these events, I do not sit down. I refuse to sit and make people comfortable around me when there's a chance they will be talking about what happened to my daughter. And so I was standing at my seat the entire morning. And when the senator introduced me, all the cameramen started snapping pictures because I was there standing.
Right.
And he looked over. When we got ready to go for lunch, I walked over and I'm talking to Senator Blumenthal, who I've got to know quite well. And we were just chatting. We start to say goodbye to each other. I turn around and Kavanaugh is getting up. He's 3-4 steps from me.
Mm-hmm.
So I take 3-4 steps over. I touch him on the elbow. He turns around and I extend my hand and I introduce myself exactly as I do to everybody who I will be talking to about my daughter. And I said, "Hi, my name is Fred Guttenberg, father of Jamie Guttenberg, who was murdered in Parkland." As soon as I got to the murdered in Parkland part was where he turned around and did a beeline out. And Rosenstein and McGann, who were sitting right by him, they heard it. They got up and they kind of whisked him out as well. If you look at the video, you'll see them going right out of there with him.
What is going through your mind when he walks away like that? Because in my mind, I'm saying to myself things I can't say on the radio, and I'm calling him a coward and gutless. I mean, that's what I'm thinking. What are you thinking when you're trying to shake Kavanaugh's hand? And even if you just shook your hand and say, "I'm sorry, Mr. Guttenberg, I have to go now. Let's talk at another time," you would have respected that, right?
You know, listen, I was taken aback. All that I wanted to do, he brought his family there, and he introduced his family. And they're a beautiful family. And all I wanted to do was say, you and your family live in a community like the one that my daughter was killed in. And I want you to remember that if you ever have a chance to rule on any gun safety measures.
Right.
That's all I wanted to say to the man. I didn't get the chance. He didn't want to hear it. I was taken aback. I didn't get the gravity of it until about 20 minutes, 30 minutes later. People start texting me like crazy. What happened? These pictures in the video. I didn't watch. So I went back up and go to sit back, back to my area, and I'm going to stand back by my seat. And Kavanaugh comes back in and he sits down. And he looks over at me and he winks. And I thought he was trying to say, that didn't go well. I apologize is what I thought he was saying. So I nodded back and I said, no problem. Literally 20 seconds later, 3 armed D.C. policemen come and remove me from the room.
Oh, my God.
Oh, yeah.
So Fred, Kavanaugh had to have complained. He went back in a room there.
He did.
Yeah.
He didn't. And here's how I know.
What a piece of garbage. Oh, God.
When they removed me from the room, they asked me to extend my right arm. On my right arm, I wear 3 bracelets that are specific to my daughter.
Right.
And, they're different orange bracelets that we've had made up and stuff. And he must have seen them because as soon as I get out, the cops asked me to extend my right arm. I want to know what their bracelets are about and what the message is that I'm trying to send. So,
oh my goodness! I didn't know that.
Yeah, I explained to the cops. They interrogate me for about 20 minutes, take my license, and run a background check, and eventually they let me go back in.
And Kavanaugh never acknowledged you again. You've never spoken to him since, correct?
No, and in fact, he lied about it because the next day, I was there the rest of the first day. I was there the next day and Lindsey Graham even tried to get him to acknowledge that there was a Parkland dad. Is there anything you'd like to say to the dad? And he said, change the topic and went off on some other tangent.
And how does it make you feel that this guy is on the Supreme Court?
Well, so here's the deal. Later that week, all those senators got to ask questions again under oath. And he answered that if he had only had a chance to see me again, he would have really have liked that opportunity.
That's nonsense.
And so that was a lie under oath because I was there for 3 days.
Yeah.
So how does it make me feel? It confirms for me we have a liar who's serving on the Supreme Court and an indecent guy. He's just not a decent guy.
Yeah.
But listen, he's serving. He's there.
Sad.
And it scares the daylights out of me because he will have a chance to rule on important things. For example, today, Remington filed an appeal with the Supreme Court on their loss in Connecticut regarding the Sandy Hook lawsuit because they're being sued by the families from
Right.
Sandy Hook.
Right.
And Remington filed to the Supreme Court today. That's how badly they don't want to be put under oath to talk about their marketing and what they knew about the numbers of weapons they were producing and the impact that would have on lives.
They don't want to take any responsibility.
No. And now Kavanaugh is going to be one of the votes
Oh,
that
jeez.
potentially will hear that case.
Oh, God, that is scary.
I have a good guess as to how he's going to rule.
Yeah, I think we all do. Well, let me ask you this before we got a couple more minutes left here. Have you reached out to anybody in the Trump administration? Have you tried to sit down and speak with Donald Trump?
I was invited to the White House after the Betsy DeVos school safety report. All the families were. And I refused to go because the report refused to talk about the role of guns and what happened to my daughter. And if you can't talk, there was other good stuff in there, but if you can't talk about the role of the guns and the gun violence, then to me, it's a farce.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to go for a photo op.
I don't blame you.
So
yeah.
After that day, his chief domestic policy advisor called me wanting to know why I didn't go. And I explained, and he still asked for the opportunity to meet with me. And I did meet with him. I went to we met in the executive building. It was a private meeting, no media, no photo ops, but to talk about what I would like to see from this White House. Never had a follow-up, hasn't responded to my messages since then looking for a follow-up, and I suspect there's nothing that they intend to do about the issue of gun violence.
It's almost like if he's asked about that, he said, "Well, we did come in, we did talk, and it was a great meeting." It's almost like he did it for that reason. I'm not trying to get inside his head, but that really is sad. Well, I got to tell you something, Fred. I respect you so much, you and your family. The hell that you have gone through and your family has gone through is nothing that anyone should have to endure. And if there is anybody that should listen to people, it should be you because of sadly what you've had to go through. If you ever come to Las Vegas, we would love to have you in studio, and we will gladly do anything you need for us to spread the word and help you in your cause, because you are doing such a great thing, and we all know how proud your daughter would be of you and what you are doing in her name, and we cannot thank you enough for taking the time to join us.
Thank you. I have a feeling I'm going to be there in early October.
Great. We'd love to have you here.
Take you up on that.
Thank you so much for your time, Fred. We
Thanks a lot, Fred.
really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Take care, guys.
All right, take care. There you go, Fred Guttenberg, American activist against gun violence. His 14-year-old daughter, Jamie, gunned down at Stoneman Douglas. And I wasn't aware. He just gave us some details that I didn't know. First of all, about the shooting, I didn't know his daughter was one of the last to be shot, sadly. And then what about that Brett Kavanaugh stuff? He tries to shake Brett Kavanaugh's hand. Kavanaugh just darts away like a little coward. And then when Kavanaugh gets back into the room, he gives Fred a little wink. And then all of a sudden, 3 security guards are escorting him out. Does anybody out there want to support this guy, Brett Kavanaugh? Is there anybody out there that thinks this is a good man? Is that the way a good man acts? This guy is on the Supreme Court. What a coward. What a jackass. This man lost his daughter. He lost his 14-year-old daughter at Stoneman Douglas. He wasn't being rude. He's respectful. He's very eloquent. He's an intelligent guy. You could disagree with his opinions on guns. That's fine. But Brett Kavanaugh couldn't even shake the man's hand, and then he gets escorted out, and this is the guy you want on the Supreme Court? Forget about politics. Forget about policy, JD. You support Brett Kavanaugh? You support his behavior in this situation specifically? It's disgusting.
Wait, you're asking me?
Yes.
You're asking me that question.
Yes.
Okay.
How could anybody support him?
If this is true, that he,
of course it's true.
that he did wink at him like, "Hey, ha ha ha, you're about to be removed from this
Why
room."
would Fred lie?
Well, obviously, but that's ridiculous to me. That's a really bad sign for everything else that's going on with him.
Of course it is. And Fred makes a great point. This is the guy, you talk about these bills that are I shouldn't say bills, but these things that are going to the Supreme Court for decisions. You think Brett Kavanaugh's on Fred's side when it comes to this stuff? Absolutely not. And then Donald Trump invites him to a meeting, and I'm sure Fred had a lot to say, and then nobody in the Trump administration reaches out to him again for another meeting. It's a disgrace. This is the way we treat the parents who have lost their daughters, their sons, at the hands of gun violence.
In all fairness, President Trump did meet with him. And he's a very, very busy man for a number of reasons.
He's a very busy man, but what about a follow-up?
I don't think he was going to meet 2 or 3 times with him. I just don't believe he was.
How about a follow-up? How about something?
Again, he met with him. At least he gave him some of his time.
It's not enough if no action is taken, in my opinion, and no action has been taken. What? Trump got rid of bump stocks. Big deal. Well, I'll tell you what. The next guy we have coming up in studio, another great guest, Seth Moulton will be joining us. He is running for president of the United States, and I know he's got a lot to say on this issue, and he's got a lot to say in regards to the Democratic debates and much, much more. Seth Moulton in studio coming up next. You're listening to The Vegas Take right here on the all-new 101.5 FM, 720 AM, KDWN.
This is The Vegas Take with Sharp and Shapiro.
Come on, guys!